Yeah. Okay. For being recorded. Okay, I call this meeting to order. And starting off, we'll have a question of approving the minutes from August 11, 2025. Any corrections to those minutes? Okay, additions or anything? So I move approval of the minutes of August 11, 2025, and I will try to read off the roll. Dick Benka.
Yes.
Ruth Ellen Fitch.
Yes.
Is Jeff Rudolph here?
No.
Okay, Sergio Modigliani,
Yes.
Anna Gelbert,
Yes.
Sadaf Kavni,
Yes.
Sarah Matata.
Yes.
Is John Doggett here? Doesn't look like he is.
Except it's your alternate there.
Okay, John, is John, he's an alternate, but is he here?
He's not.
Okay. Jesse Hefter, or you're an alternate too? Cliff Brown, AC alternate.
Also an alternate.
Yes. Without in the
Right,
absence.
But you have a vote, right?
Yeah.
Okay, you don't want to vote? Fine. Okay, and chair votes yes. So the minutes are approved, and now let's move on to, let's skip over update on questions to schools until Bella Wong arrived, and go to, we do revenue enhancements, expenditure reductions, or
I think you might want to, I think we might want to try to take this, we might want to talk about the last question for the
Okay.
last section first, and talk about it in terms of scheduling and how we want to address where we are and where we're going.
okay,
Right now, the subcommittee on the revenue split and structure met yesterday, and we talked a bit with the team there about timeline based on getting feedback from the schools and having an opportunity to do a deeper dive. The finance team put together at the request of the subcommittee a document which I think is in your packets, or we will put in your packets if it's not, which is a breakdown of the town school split, how much money is actually allocated for the line versus below the line, how much money is assessed to the schools versus services that are not assessed, where that, where those payments are coming from, what that would look like if everything is split out, basically. And so that information is in there. I am also doing some follow-up. I received a request to reach out to Arlington about their experience with the override cycle and collective bargaining. So I have a calling to their town manager. Once I have that conversation, I will report back to the group. But I had a request to follow up on that, so I will make sure that happens. The request to the subcommittee was that a recommendation be made to broader group in the first week of October. And the thought for that behind that was that's also the week the school enrollment figures will be out. And it'll be too soon to do anything with the school enrollment because they will be coming out that week. But if then the subcommittee has recommendations on the financial model and the town school split, those can be put forward to the full committee. And then when the full committee meets, hopefully the subsequent week, the second week in October, you have a recommendation on the structure of the revenue split and whether the model needs to be shifted in any significant way. And then you also have the enrollment figures and hopefully at that point, the full attention from the school side with that final piece of information. You'll have the answers to the questions from the schools. You'll have the answers on the enrollment figures, the trend lines and all of those things. And from there, would be my hope that we can start having a conversation about, enhancements, reductions, and what can happen on that front. In the interim, on the town side, I would like us to discuss, given that, and again, it's not my preference, but given the condensed timing, it would be my preference to discuss some of the reductions that we're thinking about. And so I would like to present, if this is what the committee would like for the town, I would like to present proposals for where we see the opportunities to make some reductions. And what we would do in a scenario if we couldn't find adequate revenue to cover that 3.1 million that we're looking at now. I also very preliminarily have, I've had a conversation with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. They have been having some discussions more broadly about tax policy statewide, with regard to how it's impacting how the loss of federal funding and the increases in healthcare costs are impacting municipalities, not just in the greater Boston area, but around the state. They have suggested the potential for a partnership with the Kennedy School in doing some investigatory work on how municipalities decide whether and when an override is necessary and what they do for that, front. They have, I have not had this conversation with them, but the professor in the class that do this work do offer data analytics analysis, for free, as part of their coursework over the course of the semester. So I am looking to see whether or not we can utilize their services as including potential drafting work on any final report of this committee, review of any drafting work of this committee. So that is where I, in terms of the town side of things. But again, I want to let Bella talk a bit about where the schools are and how we can make this time useful to you. Because I feel like with the incomplete information that's out there right now, I don't necessarily know where, I don't necessarily know how to make September as productive as possible for you. That is why I want to have this discussion now. I think it's good that Dick has brought to the meeting some issues to discuss more broadly in terms of the analysis of where we are in terms of growth and numbers and growth in tax over time. So kind of talking about the macro level data and potentially having that fold into discussions of reductions on the town side or service consolidation on the town side. So that's where I see September at this juncture moving into October. But I will say that that does put extreme time crunch on the screen.
Just a comment on that. Oh, sorry.
No,
I was just going to ask about the enrollment side. I've anticipated so like a 20% shift, but like 350 students less are showing up. So the question is, why wouldn't we want work now, assuming if I don't know a plus or minus delta of 10% even, that's 700. That's 700 students. Probably not going to happen. So we're probably talking about a plus or minus 50, 70, 80 students. What's the swing? I mean, and we really don't know, but we'll know how many students show up next Tuesday, and we'll know how many show up Wednesday and Thursday because it's been tracked every single day. So I'm just concerned that we're waiting an entire month to get like an official DESE. We're going to report attendance number for this committee. We could assume that the same number of students as we had in June and work. And if it turns out that that we as a school come back, or the school department comes back and says, hey, we've increased our number of students, then our costs for next year may go up, and it's not helping us in terms of finding savings. If they're telling us it goes down a little bit, still, with a small change in students may not significantly affect the bottom line in terms of where the budget's going to be with other costs rising. So I'm just concerned that we're using enrollment as a trigger point in terms of moving forward.
Yeah, I think Justin makes a really good point. And there's no reason to avoid saying, okay, we're going to put a stake in the ground with information we have, let's analyze it, and then we'll refine it if and when we have to, which actually ties in with the question I have, which is, what are the revenue numbers that we're going to be looking at in order to determine or to understand how the projected deficit on either side is derived. I think having all that information is actually the first step before we look at any suggestions from either side on cuts.
Especially because enrollment at this juncture doesn't impact teacher employment. if we haven't pink slipped somebody last May, we still have them with us, right? So enrollment doesn't have a direct impact on expenses right now.
I guess my question on that would be the big swing is, special education. If that, you can assume it's gonna be steady state, is that the place where you can have a big swing that upsets all of the, projections that you're making? And how soon do you know that number, or is it immaterial and it doesn't matter?
You could say, but
Keeps moving.
It keeps moving.
Yes.
every,
Students age
every
out.
time during the,
students leave,
any time.
students go. Always.
Okay, so wherever you put your stake in the ground, it's for that time only until the next thing moves. Okay, that helps.
And I think on our end, we can certainly guide information, the revenue projections that we have those, or we have quarterly revenue numbers going back, we can give that to you. Very quickly. So,
I mean, where is the town right now in terms of preparing, or I guess looking at. We're looking at 27, right?
right,
So when are you in a position to say this is really our best first guess as to what 27 is going to look like?
I mean, we can be ready to have that conversation with you in, next month, early next month, we have the quarterly figures that have come in thus far. We project based on rolling cycles, we have a sense of, Melissa, Charlie, and we can track this stuff very closely. We have a sense of where we think the revenue numbers come in. I will say, we are seeing initial volatility in this. Lincoln, you want to talk a little bit about what we've been seeing in the last couple of quarters?
Yeah, no, I mean, to your point, yes, we are seeing some more volatility this year, but we can definitely have more clear picture and to John's point next month. I think particularly with respect to parking revenues, seeing some volatility. So, that's one big area that
When you say volatility, good, in a good direction or not good direction?
I would say bad direction, but I think,
Just a lot of swing up and down.
yeah, exactly.
Hotel and motel, for example,
Mhm.
have
Yeah.
the hotel and motel excess tax has really sustained us in a lot of ways. It's come in better than expected for several years since the pandemic. And now with the new kind of environment in the political environment, those numbers are off already, off from where, we would like them to be. Building permits are slowing down. We're seeing renovations, we're seeing, smaller scale permits come in, but the era of the big ticket, large project permits is over. The next big ticket project we'd see would be in Chestnut Hill West, where we realize significant revenue from. With that said, the 40B window is open, but that process takes a long time, so we're not counting on that. We're not making any assumptions on that into this. 429 Harlan Street or any of the other potential applications. Again, and I say the 40B window is open. People think the 40B window is open. We will contest whether or not that's true. But so the era in which you could rely on, maybe one big project a year is over. That money is that there's just not enough projects in the pipeline to make that estimate. Walton Carrigan is still on hold because of the high interest rates and just the cost of doing business. They're
I'm
not.
having a little bit of trouble following because what would you be holding off on? There's reporting and then there's receiving the data and then there's analysis, right? So in the month of September, what were you proposing you would hold off on?
I was proposing that we talk about cuts and about reduction in service, but I think at this point, there's no reason to hold off on having this discussion about where we see revenues coming in, how we get to the projection that we're getting to now, which is this issue, assuming around the $3.1 million deficit. So we can talk about how we reach that figure, where we see those numbers coming in.
That assumes a town school split.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, so that's something that, you're gonna wanna, the school's gonna wanna have in order for them to be able to say to us what they, based on those numbers, what they need to do as a deficit. Right?
I guess the question is, which is the chicken and which is the
No,
egg?
I think that, well, I think the chicken is, you have to start with, you know, your revenues.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But then does the town school split drive cuts on each side, or do the potential cuts on each side drive the town school split?
I thought we were trying to work to a model that works. That looks at where we are, that helps both sides see how they can go forward and puts more things in writing in terms of shared services, but not that we go to a place that says, this side needs this much money, so that side, we're gonna adjust the split. I thought we were just trying to make the split work better.
I think it's interesting too, when you look at the history of the times the split's been modified in 95 when it was first passed, and then 2008 when it was revised. In both cases, there were significant shifts made, significant changes made to how the model worked, but the actual dollar values didn't change that much. Even though in 08, I think it went from I'm sure where I'm confused as to whether it's 08 or 95, but the memo talks about how it was a 2/3, 1/3 split, and then it says we're going to 50-50. But because these services are now quote unquote above the line, it actually has minimal impact on the town and school budgets. It's just a better way of laying out how we do business. And I think similarly here, for example, putting healthcare below the line in the current environment will result in a savings for the schools. Right now, the schools are slightly subsidizing. Or that's not the right way to look at it. With the cost above the line, schools don't see as much benefit from the healthcare aspect of it. They see less money coming through the split than they would if they took on healthcare costs directly. But not much, in the realm of $150,000. So it's not nothing, it's something. But it's not at a, this wouldn't cause a systemic upheaval. And by the same token, when you look at, for example, the costs that the town takes on for the schools that are not currently assessed, like that's not it's not nothing, but it's not millions and millions of dollars. The big ticket items like IT and buildings and parts of HR are assessed. And so those do make up a portion of the school assessment. And then there's just this question of where is that documented? How do we make sure that the schools understand and are able to enforce the services they receive, and the town understands how the assessment is put in place.
To get back to your question, though, I think that the subcommittee is not going to be saying anything until sometime in October. And this work that we're talking about here can be started in September. And I think that we're going to start with the split as it is now. And then, you can actually begin to use that as a base to test out what might happen with the recommendation that the subcommittee may come up with. So,
and I think some of the initial levers that we're talking about pulling, for example, the select board has increased the percentage of revenue that put towards the CIP, the revenue charge for the CIP every year. What does that look like if that number goes back down to where it used to be? What does it look like if it goes lower? Now it's 6.6%. What if it was at 6, which is where it used to be? What if it was at 5.5? What are the trade-offs there? What we see in terms of, capital projects and investments there. Obviously, we don't want to get into a situation where we're cutting close to the bone and repair and maintenance combination. So, but that's a question.
I think the whole question of the special education reserve fund and how that gets, if it gets added to the waterfall, and how that gets replenished and drawn on and all that type of stuff, that's not an insignificant amount of money that people are talking about.
Yep. So all of those conversations can happen in September. And I think perhaps then the path forward here is to provide the committee now with revenue, with our quarterly revenue history of the last 5 years, which we can do, going back to them. Again, if you want to go back further, if there are specific years that you would like us to look at, or data you would like us to pull, we can pull further back, pull and run different analyses. And we can give you what we are projecting, what we see based on the data, what we are projecting.
Once you go back into pandemic territory, it throws everything off.
Yes.
So for me, it makes sense to focus on what we call normalizing, although I'm not sure we're back to normal, but going back 5 years puts us where we were slashing things, and that's not the picture to look at least at the moment, until something else goes desperately wrong.
I think it is just important you look at the figures from, again, taking the last override cycle, right? So from FY 24 to FY 26 as your kind of target band. You do see a sort of normal return to normalcy on a lot of this stuff during that period. There's a bounce back, and a lot of the local receipts. There's all of that behavior starts to become more trackable. The big driver there that does not represent what we think is a new normal is the availability of federal funding and the gravitational pull of it. And it impacted the town in ways that I think are sometimes difficult to think about. For example, even just the interest that we earned on the money while it's sat in the bank waiting to be spent. It's a huge driver in why we posted these record free cash numbers year after year after year. Now that money is being rapidly spent down, we're not going to have, you're going to see, and we should expect a fall back from the $20+ million we've been seeing in the last several years to what we were seeing in the years before that, which was more like 50, 14. So I think we can get you that data and we can get you those caveats. But I think it's just important to keep in mind, even if we're thinking about this as, all right, we're not going to look at the depths of the pandemic. We're not going to look at calendar years 20 and 22. There are still those post-pandemic impacts that play a significant role in why our numbers are the way they are.
Can I comment?
Yes, please.
I want to remind us that, in my opinion, the facts that you've been discussing recently over the pandemic years cannot be taken apart from the effects of inflation during that same period. And so while, yes, you got higher returns on cash and things like that, you got it because interest rates were high, and that is a reflection of inflation. And this is why I keep trying to help people understand that if you rationalize the numbers to real terms, you would see, in fact, that things did not change materially in terms of purchasing power or costs. So just an observation. Thank you.
Yeah, that is an important observation. And I think that's true in some areas, not others, right? And especially in this area of salary, where, we tried to keep up as best we could with the cost of living in providing the benefits we did to our employees, whether they were union or non-union. But, the rate of inflation absolutely outpaced the growth of our salaries during that period. And so, in some areas, right, the growth in real and the growth in dollars that we received was offset by the fact that it costs more to buy things. But in other cases, it's the impact of inflation was not so much that it had an impact on our employees, it had an impact on the folks who work for us, but it's not necessarily felt as one-to-one as it is, for example, in the cost of building materials. So it's not always the direct line that you can draw in terms of, yes, our free cash went up by X%, but inflation went up by X%. So here's this.
Dave,
I'm
thank you.
going to pass.
How are we thinking of approaching the question of the state subsidies? There is apparently a $2 billion excess from the millionaires tax that they didn't expect.
Yeah.
What? How does one look toward the state as federal funds are being cut?
We generally view the state, we project, in the absence of data telling us otherwise, we project the state will come in flat. And I think that's the safest assumption to make. We did see some increases this year, but they weren't material. They certainly did not keep up with the costs. And again, under our split model, right, you have two primary sources of state money. You have unrestricted general government aid, UGA, and then you have Chapter 70, which is for schools. And under our model, those sources are conflated and put into the pot, and that all is then treated as revenue that is then run through the split. And so when the state says, well, Chapter 70 is going to go up by X, the statute says $30 a pupil, but we're going to make it $150 per pupil rate for minimum aid communities, which we are. That's great, that's helpful, but oftentimes what they do is they offset that by reducing UGA. And so for us, that's a wash.
And remember, of course, that the millionaire's tax is only for transportation and education.
Right.
So,
And while we have been active in having discussions with our delegation about how to strategically use that education portion of it to prop up local schools, which are in desperate need. And I mean, there are school districts that are much worse off than we are, that would really benefit from basically a rescue plan, particularly regional districts and on the Cape and out west. There's not a lot of appetite for using that money for anything other than one-time projects. They're investing in the T on the transportation side, and they're investing in community college and other, the community college subsidy program that currently exists, and many of the other sort of projects at the higher education level. They are also now talking about using that money to offset the loss in federal research funding. So they will be using that to prop up both state schools that are not research institutions and private research institutions. That's currently what they're talking about doing with that $2 billion. So really, while I would love to see them investing that money into a statewide fund for, educational stopgap, they say, well, you already have the circuit breaker for that. And, that's what we're not doing. The state is very reluctant to intervene in local school districts because of the you break it, you buy it mentality. When Brockton posted that $14 million deficit that was unexpected, that nobody knew about, that was, catastrophic for that school district. There were calls to put the district in receivership, and the state didn't take them up on it because they were afraid. So I had to go over this. So for better or for worse, the state is not interested in coming to our rescue. We really have to try to solve our own problems.
So welcome, Bella.
Thank you. Great.
Well, we jumped down on the agenda to discussing preliminary recommendations and set the information we need. Again, taking those.
Okay.
So
Just one other quick comment. I would not put too much hope in the Kennedy School
No,
at this point, since if it's a school project, the semester starts now, it's not going to finish until January, even if the project starts this semester, with EVN. I'm not sure that would be useful for our purposes at all.
yeah, I will, it's very preliminary. I like the idea of having extra sets of hands to do some of the data analysis and work that you would need. But yes, I don't expect them to write the report for us. I don't expect them to develop, large scale model. I don't expect the world of them, but I think the benefit that we could get out of having, dedicated researchers and modelers who can take some of the questions that you've been asking, do deep dives into them, that can be useful to us. So I want to have that discussion with them to see if that's something that would be helpful. Yes, in terms of the end product, I don't expect that to do.
what about the UMass Boston Institute? Are they more or less student focused?
You mean,
Student run.
you mean Collins Center?
Yeah.
They're more of a consulting firm, yeah. They do have occasionally students that do work there, but they're a more professional consulting firm.
Well, I was gonna say, just maybe the professor you were talking about's already done it. In other words, it's not like he's starting from fresh in September. If he's done this for years and he has a new class coming in, he may have a drill that give somebody or a group that could plug our numbers in and get answers sooner than, November.
Yeah, it's project based. So, it's unfortunate and, they've expressed interest in working with a community that's considering whether or not to have an override. That's where their interest is, but they haven't done that kind of work before. They have worked with municipalities to answer specific questions about their operations or municipal finance, but they haven't, done an override study before. So like to Dick's point, I don't want to put all or even most of our eggs in that basket, but I would love it if we could get some outside help for you as you have questions and to get them crunching the numbers and doing the work on that front.
So on the agenda, it has assigned committee members to draft various sections of initial recommendation. You want to do that?
I think at this point, we've got to push that back. We're not even at a point where we have structure of that. But I do really appreciate the committee's feedback on how to have a more productive September. And I think we can start on our end by providing you with the revenue projections. And coming back in to discuss both those, where we think the money is going, where we think those numbers are going to be in 27, 28, 29. And then having a discussion about where the reductions or consolidations lie, at least on the municipal side.
Question, based on the presentations that we heard from all the departments, is there some kind of summary that's been produced of where each department came in terms of, let me back up. Each department that we heard from uniformly mentioned that they're short on what they'd like to do.
Yes.
So I don't see any report that's going to come out of the 10 departments that we heard or read their, like for Veterans Affairs, we read a letter, read hearing the presentation.
Yep.
I don't anticipate any department coming and saying, we're going to be rosy. We've got our revenue. Even the schools coming in and saying, here are the 3 things we're going to do to start charging for after school or charging for extra hours or ALC expansion or something. And suddenly we've got this like larger revenue thing. So for all the departments that we listened to, everybody had needs and not enough money.
Right.
My sense is even if the enrollment in the district for the schools slides up or down a bit, it's still not going to really change expenses all that much. And so the way I'm not sure that where we are going to see after all those reports, from police and fire and everything, where any revenue opportunities are at all. I mean, we can hear it. So
there are some, and they are just they're not enough to offset the additional costs. So I think that's where the question at the heart of this committee is where I have tried to prioritize in developing this this layout for you on the town side is continuity of service. What does it cost to maintain what we have now? And then from there, where are we on staff here on community priorities? Where are the select board's priorities? What are town meetings priorities? What do the voters want us to do? We hear, roads, schools, senior services, we hear a lot of, sustainability. We hear a lot of that voice. And so we try and prioritize that, but we also have to prioritize, just things that are not as flashy or as exciting to the voters. That are things like, getting your trash picked up. Continuity of service is at the top of the list. And then following from that are community priorities.
is there any way that in that amazing work that Charlie did on the spreadsheet we saw yesterday, that we can flag those things that are the absolutely have to haves and the ones that are in this category? Well, maybe we could see some flexibility. Maybe he can, he's on, right? I don't want to talk about him there first, but basically, I mean, that was phenomenal yesterday. And so I'm thinking maybe it would give us some insight and other people who look at it, insight of the things that really are not negotiable, meaning continuity of service. like picking up the trash or, getting sidewalks flat, whatever, are marked as like, these are the areas that we're probably going to see growth in or necessary growth because of inflation, or the work has to continue for the next couple of years. We're not going to finish it in the next 2 years. And then look at the things that are flagged as, well, here are areas where we might be able to look at reductions.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the work that I've been doing. Dick also asked for the covering memo that I've been working on, discussing basically this idea that this is a period of scarcity. We're not talking about everything under the sun. We're talking about what's necessary. But even there, I think that discussion with this group is going to be critical in shaping our priorities on staff. For example, the graph that Aaron should put up about the condition of roadways, right? Do you want to be here? Do you want to have that graph going back up? Do you want to have it flat? Or are we comfortable, given the immense cost of that, are we comfortable with basically a managed decline, which is where we are now? So those are the kinds of, when we talk about continuity of service, it's also about what continuity of service. We have 6 positions open in the police department. Be my preference to fill those positions for many reasons, but every position is $150,000, and that number will grow as the cost grows. So, those are positions that are not currently filled. What happens if you don't fill all of them? We have that conversation.
So just, so I'm clear, so what we got yesterday was fiscal 26
Yes.
budget. And would you look at the fiscal 26 budget and say, talking about the fiscal 27 budget, what we're looking at in fiscal 26 is the base for continuity of service?
Yes, with the knowledge that we know some of those costs are going up, right? So we have projections for.
Right.
Yeah. We have a base projection for continuity of service, and changing nothing, right? That's where that $3.1 million comes in right now. Changing nothing, assuming a conservative revenue estimate, revenues with expenditures for continuity of service would outpace revenues by $3.1 million. That's where the town is now.
I'd be very interested to hear the last time we went through this process, how the timeline was different or the same, and maybe lessons learned of things. What we should anticipate more this time.
Last time the process, you were there.
There wasn't an override study committee, was there?
No,
It was a working group
there was a working group.
with no information released to the public, which was a problem for me. I was even, I don't talk to Cliff a lot in between things like this, and it's, Cliff, how did you come up with these numbers? So I think the thing that the public in general doesn't seem to understand is that we're making more requests than we have dollars to fund. That part of how the roadways got to be such a crisis is that we decided we needed this new thing and that new thing and the other new thing. I'm only speaking on the town side. I assume there are similar pressures on the school side. So for me, if we want people to say, okay, I'll vote for another override, which they're moaning about right now, then it needs to be crystal clear. It's not just this, as is often accused of the schools, they cherry pick the programs that people want the most to say this is how they're so. It really needs to get into you will not have your trash picked up every week. We might go to, and I know this is ridiculous because we can't under state law, but that's the kind of crystal clear and consistent voice that needs to be out there, because people are, as Dick's chart shown, we've been paying and paying and paying. What do you mean? There's still potholes on my street. By the way, I want a swimming pool. That's the mindset that we have to be able to change.
Oh, hockey, right?
Whatever,
When did the override get written last time as it ends then prior to the May vote?
Very late. The committee, the working group started meeting in earnest in late October. the work was done very much, you know, at a rapid clip because it had to be. The initial recommendations, I believe, came out in late January. We had a discussion similar to the discussion we had last, 2 times ago with the towns, breaking out the priorities and so forth in December. That was the first time we had that discussion. So you're already months ahead of schedule from where we were last time, which is good. It's where we need to be. And then that process really was very compressed. The superintendent and I had a number of discussions about, how do you fit all the community priorities and needs in to a mandate to keep this below a 10% tax increase when you already have Pierce taking up more than half of that. Where do you go from here? And how do you make it fair to both sides? I think that was the other big thing, was that there was a push towards the end on the school side to say we need more, we would love more. And the town had to push back and said, that's, I understand you want more, but the select board is telling us 2 million for roads is the baseline. We're not going to divert from that. And so we had to have those hard discussions about, what are the needs that you can live within? Because can't, on the town side, we're not going to be in a situation where we were in 2018, where the town was kind of an afterthought. Got, I think, $150,000 out of a multi-million-dollar override.
I don't think the situation was tough.
Okay, and so
In terms of what was done.
do we already have in mind a date that the graph will be written by this time?
I think the initial recommendations would be made to the select board and advisory committee at the forecast meeting, which is the last meeting of the year in December.
Any further discussion? Okay, let's get back on the agenda. Update on questions to schools.
So it's a question about timing for response? Yes,
Yeah.
and so, I'm sorry apologies to the committee, just, as we've come in, we are picking up pieces and are prepared fully for school opening, but it's been a lot of work to get everything together. And, so yesterday we met with, the 70-member leadership team, and tomorrow we welcome all staff, and students are coming back on Tuesday. So after students come back on Tuesday, I talked to Deputy Superintendent Susan Gibbons. So we're hoping to start rolling answers to you in September. All right. And so we just need to make sure everything's in place for the opening of schools, and then actually once schools are open, that energy goes to the buildings, and then that gives us a little capacity to address the questions. We have reviewed them, we just haven't been able to come all together. And also the team hasn't been, due to summer vacations, have been in the same place all together. So we've been sort of touching base, getting prepared for school opening. And but that's what, in talking with Susan, we thought we could do that was reasonable. I hesitate to say when all of the answers will come, but I know that we could probably get a bulk in September.
Great, thank you. Any further
That's
discussion?
enough, that's right.
Oh, for that.
Hi, so I just wanted to chime in here. I had sent this note via email. It's included in the packet, but I think it might be helpful if we can sort of break out the questions by tier, just sort of given that a lot of this discussion is going to start happening over the course of September, and obviously, it's a long list of questions, and some of the areas that were requested, where information was requested, are likely going to be bigger sort of levers, so to speak, to the budget. So there was sort of a subset of those that I had suggested in my email. So special education, specifically, as well as potentially classroom size, and some of the ratios. I think Sarah, you also had some thoughts on this as well. So my suggestion is, and I'd like to hear from the rest of the committee as well as from the schools, is that we sort of chunk these out into, here are the most critical ones that it would be most helpful for this committee to have first. And then, Belle, you and your team can kind of phase that in a way that feels, maybe more reasonable from a timeline point of view.
We have.
If that's helpful,
I think honestly, we were gonna do whatever we had right away that we have available, and whatever would take longer would just be whatever took us longer to be able to provide answers for. You can prioritize, but I think we're actually anxious to take advantage of the month of September to answer as many questions as possible. Because as Chaz knows, we actually start entering into regular budget building season shortly after, especially after the October 1 enrollment deadlines, reporting deadlines. We're already heading into capital and then building budget as well. So we want to take advantage of September as much as possible.
Okay.
But happy to hear, like, if they're already in your email, we can refer back. I can refer back to it.
So I didn't include all of, how I would tier it out in an email. We can do that as kind of, a second round. Or again, Sarah, I think you had some suggestions as well. And the thing that I was, it makes sense that some of this data is more readily available and that's easy to get. I would imagine that some of the data that's actually harder to get would be helpful to have earlier. And I think it might make sense for us to sort of prioritize that list for you, and then you can, use that as an input into your timeline and how you tackle it. To the extent that, you're burning, time sort of pulling data that's going to be less helpful. So Sarah, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but my suggestions were around sort of classroom size, as sort of a larger category, special education. There were a series of questions. There's a question around sort of space utilization. Those were some of the big areas from my point of view. And, we can discuss as a committee whether we find that useful or not. So I'm interested in hearing from other people whether we think that's useful or not.
Thank you for referring to me and giving me a chance to speak. I think that I'm having trouble with the complexity of it because when you say levers, I'm thinking that you're assuming that there's decisions that can be made by this committee. And I see some of those decisions as being school committee decisions. And those decisions tend to be like, if you're talking about things that could impact the budget and would tell us what type of budget we will be putting together, it's the superintendent's budget, until it gets to the school committee and the school committee votes on line items. And that process happens later than the work of this committee. So are they really truly levers for this committee, or are they, is it a narrative to understand so that people understand the ask of the override and feel that the school is making good decisions? Is it sort of like, it is more what you're asking for, an explanation of why have you made these decisions going into this budget cycle in order to help this committee feel trust in what you're asking for?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and perhaps my usage of the word levers is more sort of informed from my business background. What I was getting at was that there are areas where there has been specific interest from this group and that do drive the costs that I think it would be helpful to understand better going into this process so that people can have their head around, as you said, why those decisions were made, and whether there are plans to, or what the implications of those areas and sort of what we see as the growth or lack of growth in those areas will be, or why they might be out of sync with targets, or why they're growing at the rate that they're growing. But there have been certain areas that have already been optimized, for example, and might not be areas that it's worth probing into as much. But to the extent that there are areas that we want to ask more questions about, I think it would be helpful to have that information earlier. Special education is, obviously an important one. We talked about the reserve fund, and there's a lot of discussion about that, and a lot of questions I think that this group has. And I think it would be helpful for the schools to share a little bit about, share more, earlier about that particular area, given the questions that have been asked.
I think one of the good examples to flesh out your idea is the example of BEEP. BEEP has been recently adjusted and wouldn't probably be a lever in the immediate. And so that's why that sort of fell to the bottom. I don't want to give a different idea that special education is somehow, a lever. But I like when you use the word forecast, that's when we're in our sort of best overlapping zone of understanding. Is this committee certainly needs to understand what the schools anticipate as being increases in budget, because presumably there will be a level service budget that will be the superintendent's budget this time around, because we're in a time of, we don't have a lot of room to play with. And so within that level service budget, forecasts from the school personnel who understand these issues will be super helpful to this committee to understand where things might go up.
So in looking over the questions, I actually see that they're not really forecast questions. They're up through the current year. And so I don't see it being problematic that we can pull the information for the data that we have. What takes us longer are comparables. That's something we don't already have. So anything that we don't already have is what takes us longer. But everything else we should be able to do.
So just to go back to the conversation had at the beginning, one thing that the committee is going to need is, in fact, a forecast that assumes a steady state, because that's where we're starting. That's the starting point for the analysis on both sides. So that is certainly something that needs to get done, because we can't do anything about that. And neither side is going to be presenting a budget beyond that.
Sure. How fine-tuned do you need the forecast to be? Because I mean, we can make a forecast that's based on, forecast at this point is just based on your modeling, based on your assumptions. So, and because of that, it's the earlier you do it, the less close it gets. So I might ask Chaz offline, like how he built his, to get an idea how we can make comparable assumptions. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah, I think it's also important that some of these questions are just to make sure that we and the whole community understands what some of these pieces are. We know we have something called BEEP, but how do the kids get in? And that's, I believe, information that you have. So some of it is just so that if we make a recommendation, whatever it may be, we can explain it. We can explain how school costs got to be here, and why you think they're going to be there. But if we don't have what many people or people in the community consider to be maybe not mandatory programs, but discretionary programs, but they're near and dear to our heart, to understand how we people them, why they're at the size they are. That comes up a lot with regard to Metco. I've lost track because things have changed since the last time I was involved with exactly what we do with BEEP. So some of those questions are just very foundational. Don't give me chapter and verse, give me a paragraph so that when someone asks me a question, I can answer it. There are 300 people in the program. It's a lottery that gets them in. It's this, that, it's the other thing. And then go deeper into the things and spend more of the time on saying, we're now grounded in where we are now, which I don't think you all were when you came into this. And this is what we see happening next year, and based on that, what we project for the next 2 or 3 years, because if we're talking about an override, we're not talking about this is what we need and we'll be back again.
Yeah. I was just saying one of the things that I was actually going to mention earlier, in terms of what Janet's saying, a lot of people that I talk to in town, maybe they're not confused, but they conflate the buildings and the school's operation.
Yes.
And every other person I talk to will tell me we're building bigger schools and fancier schools that we need. They're spending a lot of money. There's like materials that are used in the schools are not the standard, but even better. And we've made things, a little bit too fancy and 22 Tappan has windows that are hard to clean, and it goes on and on and on and on and on. And I think the public, when looking at the schools, conflates what we're paying for buildings, and they see Pierce happening now, and then the schools saying we need more money. And what people do is they combine that and they say, well, I've heard all these complaints about how much money we're spending on buildings, and here's the school coming and saying they need even more money, even though the more money is salary and programs and things like that, sports, whatever it might be, field trips, all these different things, the non-grant stuff. But people are also thinking about, well, look at all this money we're spending on buildings. So we need a way to properly educate the public to separate those two, that whatever, I'm not going to call them mistakes, but whatever decisions, let's say, that have been made in the past about how much money we're going to spend on buildings, that debt service and increase cost in managing how much it's costing on buildings we haven't paid off yet, plus buildings that we're building, is different than what we're looking in terms of, potentially having to reduce services in the schools and asking for additional funding in next year's budget from 142 million to, let's say, 150 million or something because of, inflation and increases.
I think it's a very valid. The only comment I'd make is that when people are thinking about their pocketbook, they're not thinking about,
Exactly.
here's what I'm willing to spend on buildings and here's what I'm willing to spend on operations. They just know they're getting one tax.
They know they're getting.
And I think that's more
Mhm.
the issue than anything else. I think it's a pinch on the.
But I think that Jesse makes a good point, because I hear it too, because the buildings are sunk. And it's, again, a clear explanation that we're talking about two different things. Will it affect me differently? No, but that's exactly what I thought when I looked at the charts that Dick presented. How much of this increase came out of the fact that we built 4 schools in this period of time, or Pierce is still in progress, but we approved 4. I believe step by step they got larger. Debt exclusions.
Yeah.
I pay for it all at once, but that's very definitely on the mind of the voter. And so we need a clear understanding, and we need those very simple talking points as to, yeah, we know that it's all one pocket for you, but we can't, if we say we're going to not provide education for the kids, we're not going to make up any difference by saying instead of an override, we'll trim back the finishes at Pierce, which I think is the only one that's still available for adjustment. They're two separate things, and it's critical that people understand it, even though it all comes out of the same wallet.
Dick?
Yeah, I think on both the town and the school side, there are the questions of what are the discretionary versus the mandatory programs and services. And even within the context of the mandatory services or the must-have services, what are the discretionary sizes and staffing and level of those services? And I think those, for example, if X has to be provided, does it have to be provided at this level, on the town side or on the school side? And I think those are questions that are fair to address.
But if those questions tend towards the justification and the explanation, I'm wondering if, does that take away, do you have the capacity to do that and also do the forecasting? Or is there a chance that it would be better to ask you for the forecast only right now, and you could get to that quicker?
So, again, I can check with Chaz about the comparable assumptions for a forecast. But I will say too, giving you information for FY, 23, 24, 25, 26, it is what it is. Those are numbers. I started July 1, and I feel I have been spending full time coming up to speed with all programs, but also all challenges in the district. If you continue everything the way they are, that may not be the best recommendation to continue them as they are. So there might be some recommendations I would make that are important to consider. Doesn't mean that it would be included, but there might be some improvements that are important to consider. So when you ask me to do a forecast, that would be ahead of my being able to do that. It would be just based on what's been done to date. And I think it's important to remind you all that FY26, it has a structural deficit in it, meaning that the funding for this current fiscal year is drawing funds that we are receiving in this year. And so that's around 2 million that we're building on top of when we create the forecast for the future. I don't think it would be responsible of me just to say I won't look at the district for things that we might need to add. I think there's a question of the K-5 language program that needs to be discussed. There was a commitment to look at it. And I think the school committee needs to think about, do they want to add it back in or not? The other is, I want to feel good about the forecast we may provide you. And so I want to be sure I have some certitude around our account, so that I understand the need to have a number, and I just want to make sure it's the best number.
So, thank you. And obviously you'll talk to Chaz, but I think what we're talking about as it relates to forecast, and the purposes for why we're asking for it, are sort of a precursor to developing a budget, which I think is what I'm hearing you talk about, which might have suggested changes. Because what we need to start with to understand the numbers that have been tossed around so far is, okay, if we did in 27 exactly what we're doing in 26, adjusting for built-in cost increases, and given a set of revenue projections that the town's going to give us, and given the existing town school splits, what are we looking at? And that is a different analysis than I think what you just talked to us about, because I think the town would say the same thing in terms of looking at the budget they might want to build, might need to build. But that is, again, it's sort of separate from where we need to start with our analysis. And so that's what I just want to make sure that there's an understanding of what the difference is.
So I think initial forecast could be provided with not conditions, but just a full understanding of what that forecast represents. Like the other thing I haven't had opportunity to do, which I know Chaz has been working very hard on, is looking for efficiencies. I haven't had that chance to do that. Will I find any? I don't know, but I haven't had a chance to even look at that. So an initial forecast will be, we just have to be clear what that represents. If you want one now in September. Understanding that we would, understanding that we would fine tune.
When, at least if I read it right, in October, the schools will be, individual school entities will be reporting to the curriculum subcommittee on their school improvement plans or the budget. Will that include, that should include their expenses in terms of what they're looking, in terms of what they're looking for? It's not just more than educational. Is it?
I think actually the school improvement plans are largely educational. And so we've just reviewed the strategic plan and we've established our priorities based on that plan. And the understanding from the meetings that we've had with the leadership teams is that their improvement plans are going to be tied to the strategic plan. But it's really, there's nothing in your strategic plan that has money tied to it necessarily. They're really around program.
Yeah.
Yes, program development. So you will see that in your curriculum. I believe the curriculum subcommittees. Yes. So you're just going to see program presentations. Okay. Yes, and they know they are doing so. Those are in October. I just told them the date.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you turned to me and said, "Is that indeed curriculum?" And it is.
It is,
I
yeah.
don't know if I spoke up loudly enough that moment, so you understood me.
Great. But in your strategic plan, you do have a K-5 language, and I kind of have a feeling whether it's going to go, but it's a decision that needs to be made. And in fact, you want to bring that back, then that has to be costed out.
Mhm.
And if you don't want to bring it back, then it's just something.
I just
we know.
think for a level of comfort, if we're talking about something coming in, we need to recognize something else may have to fall off. Because the envelope we're working in is very, very tight. And as you pointed out on the school side, you're already starting at a deficit. In terms of this discussion of how you proceed first, my gut in listening to you is if you have a plan to get us the information we requested and you understand where it is we want to go, we shouldn't be directing you how to get it done. You just got here, as has most of your direct reports, and there's an awful lot to come to terms with. I just want to say I'm impressed at how far you've come so far. And it's not the job or the intent of this committee to put impediments in your way. So if you understand what we want, I trust you to get it to us as rapidly as you can, because you also understand we don't have all the time in the world if we're going to be able to put something before the voters that provides more resources than at this point we have.
And most importantly, whatever we give you, we want to feel good about the numbers that we give you. And so if we feel like we need more time, we won't be hesitant to ask for it. But I do believe these are numbers that we have, and that September is the month that we'll take advantage of.
And build in all the caveats so that we understand these are our assumptions and it's based on X, Y, Z. And if X takes a left turn, then this isn't going to hold up, because mostly what we're looking for is a place to put a stake in the ground. And as Sarah pointed out, it's not for this committee or anyone on the town side to say how you deal with the dollars that you get. But we need this information in order to be able to know what dollars are available to be provided.
I will say too, I don't really like being in the hole already before coming to you with a number. But I do think that the schools represent decades of investment in its programs, and that what the product that it offers is an important value to sustain. And it's what I can see, the programs are really solid and good. So that's a good thing. I don't like being in the hole, but at least when I look out at the schools, you should feel good about them, where they stand. So we just have to figure out this other part.
Okay, do we want to talk about the material that we're circulating?
Sure, thank you. Tiffany?
Tiffany is off, but I can share.
Terrific.
Tell me what you need.
These are, there are 4 documents, and I don't expect a lot of discussion today, because they were just circulated, and they really, I think, really ask questions rather than providing answers. The documents assume that fiscal year 26 is not a fixed starting point without any examination, because we're charged with looking at efficiencies potentially and at expenditure reductions. And I think we also have to consider the impact on people who will be paying for any override that we recommend. So if you could start with the FY26 versus FY20 budget comparison.
Trying to make this bigger on the screen here.
Thank you, Chaz. This spreadsheet looks at, and it's in everybody's, it's posted on the web from for today's meeting. And again, I think it's not something that is worth going into in great detail at this point. It's really illustrative. It compares the fiscal 26 and fiscal 20 budgets, taking a pre-pandemic and a post-pandemic budget. It also, for informational purposes, has fiscal 20 actual and fiscal 25. But what the yellow markings highlight are particular departments where between the fiscal 20 budget and the fiscal 26 budget, there were increases that were well above the CPI increase for that time period. The CPI increase for that time period was 23.5% in the Boston, Cambridge, Newton, Mass, New Hampshire statistical area. For example, the select board over that time period was up 40%. All of these, the town figures are adjusted on a per resident basis. The school figures, which are a little further down, are adjusted on a per student basis. So there are areas where the increase is greater, and I think a lot of these would be perfectly explicable. Some would require some further examination. It's not perfect. It does not include reserve fund transfers in fiscal year 25, for example, or obviously fiscal year 26, what might be required. It doesn't account for the fact that some subpopulations may be growing faster than the general population. For example, seniors using the Council on Aging, where seniors are growing faster than, to the extent seniors are growing faster than the general population. But it does identify some areas of potential questions. When you go down to the schools on a per student basis over that time period went up about 34% versus the inflation over that time period of 23%. So this again is adjusted on a per student basis. Down at the bottom are some of the largest now above the line numbers. pensions, group health, and so forth. So starting point for us to look at as we go forward. Then the next slide is PSB salary increases. And this, I don't know if you can.
Also,
zoom in a
blow
little
this up,
bit.
yeah, 1 second, sorry.
Thank you. This looks at the effective salary increase with the impact of steps for step 1 bachelor's degree, step 6 bachelor's degree, step 10, and so forth, step 1, 6, and 10 master's degrees. The individual who would be at the lower step in fiscal year 25, moving up 1 step in fiscal year 26, and having the benefit of the cost of living increase plus the step increase results in, for example, somebody with a step 1 bachelor's degree who is a step 2 bachelor's degree a year later would have effectively an 8% salary increase from 1 year to the other. Over the 25 to 26 period, the inflation rate, again in the same statistical area, was 3.24%. Essentially, what this shows is that the increases with steps included are significantly greater than the cost of living increase or the inflation that was experienced over that period. Now, some of this can be offset, obviously, by older teachers retiring and being replaced by younger teachers, but it does raise the question of whether we can simply assume that this sort of inherent increase will be paid for, or whether increases like this have to be offset by efficiencies or reductions in staffing, for example. Down at the bottom, there is also just a reference to the health insurance premiums that I believe can range for an individual from 8,000 to 13,000 for a family. The town share, and this is the town share, from 20,000 to 30,000 per employee. The next slide. Please.
Would you like?
Yes, thank you.
Would you like the comparables or the graph?
The comparables fiscal, either one, fiscal 15 to 25 would be great. This basically compares Brookline's increases over the last decade in taxes for single family homes, which is that's the only data that is available cross community on a statewide level. It's obviously the combined result of increases in assessments, Prop 2.5 overrides, debt exclusions, plus the regular Prop 2.5 increase. I don't believe it includes the CPA increase for the latest fiscal year, but essentially what it shows is that the single family tax increase in the upper left for Brookline is significantly higher than it is for other comparable communities. In the lower right, it looks at a percentage increase. Brookline runs somewhere over 90% in that period for single family homes on a percentage increase, or about, I'm sorry, about 80%. Cambridge runs slightly over 90%. But if you look in the upper left, Cambridge is at a much, much lower level largely because such a much smaller part of their tax burden is borne by residential properties than is the case in Brookline. But that 80%, 90% percentage increase over this decade compares to about a 35% inflation increase in the area, CPI increase in the area. So this is looking at some of the issues that Janet alluded to, of what people are seeing, and it's not just caused by operating overrides, but it is the bottom line. And finally, the last graph that I think we have to be aware of as we go forward. These are the increases over the same time period. This uses the assessor's information for that period. The bar at the lower left is the inflationary increase over that period in CPI. And then as you move across, there are condos, apartments, 2-family, 3-family, and single-family homes increasing over that period in taxes for the median property in Brookline. So just some background information, some things for us to think about as we go forward, and some particularly with the early slides, I think some explanation may be warranted as we go forward.
Sure.
So thank you.
And I'm happy to, I'm glad you brought that up. Those are areas where I was looking at them and I was thinking, okay, what caused that? I have information on almost all of them. But so I can work on that. And for the couple that I don't necessarily know the whole story on, we will dig into those. We come back to you.
Yeah, I think for the expenses, we really need to understand, we started from 20 when we were at the nadir. And a lot of those increases in between, I think, are auto related. So if I'm looking at apples and apples, I need to be able to take out those one-side type things. The same with the property tax increases. If I'm comparing Brookline, which has had 4 debt exclusions, to another community that hasn't had any, separating out the impact of those would help me understand more apples to apples. I actually took a few minutes, Chaz, and said, oh, I think this is because of this, knowing nowhere near as much about the budget as you do, but what could possibly be driving the cost. So numbers on their own, helpful as they are, only tell a very small part of the picture. We really need the context. But I thank you, Dick, for putting this all together, because it gives us something to think about and a place to start, and can help crystallize what it is we have to tease out, so that we're not just looking at raw numbers, but these are the questions we need to be asking so that the numbers make sense.
I will say on the ARPA side, while that does have an impact, I think one of the very important things the town did, both under Mel and then in continuity with Melissa and then Lincoln and me, when we came in, when Lincoln and I came into the spaces, we were very adamant on the town side. ARPA dollars are not for operating expenses.
Right.
We have been very good at that, better, I think, than most.
But I think, so my question is basically, but looking at the raw numbers, does that explain, this is what paid for that increase? And we know it's not going to go on forever, but
There are some of those in
Yeah.
there, but they're very minor. It's less than $500,000. And it deals with things like, we currently pay the Zoom license out of ARPA. And that's going to need to change. Like, that's an expense that we're just not going to be able to absorb. We'll probably move to a cheaper system like Teams once the ARPA money expires.
Well,
Because those were just operating expenses, really, not capital.
Correct.
right, no, I was thinking of things like, if I remember correctly, when Kara made her presentation, she has some staff positions that are being paid for, maybe there were CDBGs that go away.
CDBG funds.
I know there was ARPA money that went into the Council on Aging or the Senior Center.
Yes.
So that, those are basically
For
Bella,
operating or capital.
Sure.
excuse me?
wait,
No,
wait,
they
let
weren't.
Bella speak.
I think
So-
we're operating.
So I know we, at the least, we're looking to build for FY 27, and then maybe we're forecasting covering FY 28, FY 29. I was wondering, do you have the projection for FY 30 when the pension liability expires? Because that might be at least a light at the end of the tunnel. And I was wondering if there was, that when the debt exclusions expire, just like how that maps out.
Yeah.
In the long term.
So almost all of our debt exclusions are on a 30-year cycle, 25 year, sorry, 25-year cycle.
So it's, and so,
And so they're right now, based on the projects, very few, the first one being Ridley, I think, would probably come due.
Yeah,
42.
42.
FY 42,
Yeah.
okay.
So we will see that.
Great.
With the pension, the select board is actually taking up a policy on this. The important thing to realize is that when that money, when we satisfy our pension obligation, the target there is to roll over as much of that as possible into our OPEB liabilities, which are much more substantial and much less fulfilled. And so the current policy of the town is when the pension is, and the outstanding pension liabilities are met. And then remember that doesn't, after you, for the benefit of the public, that doesn't include ongoing pension liability, right? We still have money it doesn't, we're not all of a sudden done dusting our hands of it. I wish, but then we have these other liabilities, these OPEB liabilities, which we'll have to look at. And ensure that we move, right now, we're only 30-some-odd% funded right there, which is quite low. It's better in some communities, which is good, but it's low. And then the other thing that we need to consider there is our reserve policies. We go back to this over and over again. The one thing that we have the most control over when it comes to why we're rated AAA is our reserve policies. And so the select board recently shifted their reserve policies in response to the rating agencies. Initially, the rating agencies said, you want your total reserves to be around 10% of your prior year's operating budget. Then they revised it up and said 20%. And so we've been the new policy is we want to be at the median of AAA rated communities in Massachusetts in terms of reserves. So when we think of what's going to happen in FY 30, it's not as though there's not a lot of money that's going to be available for operating costs. It's going to be to satisfy the other liabilities that have accrued over these years and to meet the reserve fund obligations. So I know that is a question that people occasionally ask, what happens when you fulfill pension, but
What is the estimated totality of that though in FY 30?
to me, it's too Lincoln, do you know off the top of your head?
Yeah, so in terms of both the reserve fund piece and the OPEB, is that what you're asking? Or
No, it's just when that pension.
How much would
when
it-
that-
how much in additional
What would you
monies
have available?
would be available to be distributed across the board? Yeah, so the top in it's 54 million, I believe. The top level, and then it gradually comes down a little bit to 20 something. I'm sorry, I don't have it.
It's a big range.
28 million, and then our go forward baseline is around 9 million. So those are rough numbers. I'm sorry, I don't have the exact.
Thank
But
you.
is that the amount of money that will be released from the?
From pension,
fund?
but remember, right, we're correct. But that doesn't take into account these other obligations.
Oh, yeah, I don't think that's what she's
Yeah,
asking about.
yeah.
She wants to know what amount of money is gonna show up in 2030.
That is what is projected now to come on. Yes.
And that is 28 to 50.
No, so that's so fiscal year 29 is the highest. It's the highest level, and then coming down gradually into fiscal year 2030, and then down to the baseline pay as you go amount in fiscal year 31.
So immediately, I think, what's the question? If it's 58 is what it's gonna be in 29, and then it goes down to what, in 30?
Yeah,
Whatever. the
54, I
numbers are.
believe, but yes, yep.
So 58, and then the next year it goes down to 28, did you say?
approximately.
Yeah, okay, so
That
roughly the
assumes
first
you
year,
reach
there's
full
30.
funding.
Well, and so that's the other piece. So it is, it's adjusted every
Right.
2 years by the actuary. So that is assuming, for example, 6.8% rate of return, in our investments. We'll see what happens, right? And that assumes, for example, the same actuarial, experience that we have in terms of longevity of retirees.
And your OPEB liability is an interest bearing,
Yes.
so
Sturgis got his hand up.
I'm sorry, Sergio?
Well, it's really a related comment to Superintendent Wong's question. And I've asked this, but I haven't gotten an answer. I noticed that while the amount of outstanding debt peaked in '24 at 680 million and drops by 100 million by 3031 down to 580, the debt and interest amounts keep climbing during those 6 to 7 years, which to me is counterintuitive. And so I've asked for a clarification. Is it based on an assumption of much higher rates on the new debt that will be added, or is something else going on there? Thank you. Did you follow that, Lincoln?
Yes, yep. So and I'll get you the complete request.
Yeah, but Charlie gave an answer which led me to believe he didn't understand my question.
Well, no, so the large pieces that are coming on, for example, in fiscal year 2026.
New debt, right?
Yep, new debt are, to your point, yes, at a higher rate and more funds being borrowed. So in fiscal year 2026 is the first year that we have the first large tranche of debt for both the fire station renovations and for Pierce.
That means that the peculiarity is that you're reporting that total outstanding debt is going down, meaning we're retiring some debt. And yes, you're bringing on more, but the result is with 100 million less debt, you're projecting a significant increase in debt and interest in the outcoming years. Maybe it's a rate assumption. It could be.
I think, yeah. So I think it would be most useful from my perspective to look at the chart.
Sounds good. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
We'll leave it at that.
Yeah, just very quickly to follow up on your question, Ms. Wong. This year, we actually reduced our OPEB contribution. We had
Held at level. Yeah.
we had traditionally committed to increasing it from year to year in order to try to address the unfunded liability. But because of the operating issues this year, the amount was reduced from last year by $500,000. So we are, it is a significant unfunded liability that has to be addressed.
It's like 2040, 2050.
I believe it's the total outstanding liability. I believe it's I believe the total liability is sorry, I don't have it. I believe it's around 169 million, and of which were funded to Chaz's point at about 33%.
that's not.
Does that answer your question?
So 169.
Others are worse. Yes,
So 169 is what's funded, or that's the line?
that's the total liability.
Okay, so we get what, 50 million in there? All right.
And just to follow on Dick's comment, it may be that the performance of the market this year will give them a better return than had been expected, so that 500,000 so-called savings may not have been needed anyway, which would be very convenient.
Or by not funding it, we lost the benefit of the market.
Yes, yes.
Which can still come down. When is the next
So
actuary?
crazy.
The OPEB is actually the actuarial analysis is done annually.
Okay, and the
At the-
pension,
every 2 years.
and when is the next one due on
The
it?
next one due on the pension will be at the, let's see, it will be on January 1st, 2026.
So at the rate that this year is going so far, we're gonna look good, and I don't expect it to stay there, and that's the problem, is that we have no idea what returns on the market will continue to be in a very unstable economy.
This year isn't great overall. It's going, because it dropped so much and.
Well, like I said, if we
It's come
continue,
back, but,
well, that's,
you
yeah,
know.
it is doing this, so I wouldn't count on extreme returns, and by the end of the year, not putting that money into OPEBs might not look as bad.
And the retirement board has been decreasing the student rate of return on a fairly consistent basis. Which makes sense, but that, every time they do that, that increases the liability. It's just this.
Okay,
Thank you.
did you get your question answered? Okay, great. Unless there's anything else in revenue enhancement expenditure reductions. It's 30. See you in the meeting then. Okay, next meeting's September 4th at 5 p.m.
So we will get the,
Yeah, what time?
Five.
in advance of that, we will get you the quarterly revenue data for going back. Again, we will push you the last 5 years with the understanding that the focus is really the sheets 24, 26. I will get you follow-up information about the areas that Dick identified, the departments that Dick identified where cost increase over inflation. And then I still owe you that town prioritization list. I've been trying to make sure to frame that out, given the public interest in that. There's I want to make sure that that goes out correctly. It's not.
Chess, you also make a request.
Yes.
One, that a lot of us have been very prolific in providing information,
Yes.
but it would be helpful to have the same 48-hour. I almost didn't see Dick's stuff because I caught up on what I did in yesterday and didn't think I had to go back again.
I know.
And also, we used to get a link with a notice of meeting. And I know Jesse has mentioned it, Sarah has mentioned it before, maybe because they're not as used to looking at the town side of the website, but just something that says, here's the link to the documents that you'll need so that we can come in here as prepared as possible.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
May I add a further step? There is in fact no archive that I can find. You can go to each individual meeting and find all the attachments. But I would think that there should be an archive where all the documents are available and accessible.
There is. We can give you the link to that. Yes.
Well, all right, I made the request and was told differently. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Well, I have a file, so maybe I'll share with you my file.
That would be nice.
We'll have Tiffany just put it on the
Yeah.
ERC site.
Yep.
I mean, I'm very familiar with looking at town meetings. The
I have-
thing
I
is,
have- I have-
that Stuff doesn't show up early
Right.
enough to make it, and so if I'm, just for myself, 3 hours before this meeting, I'm already busy on other things. I come up the meeting, I checked it in the morning, nothing there. Then I go to the meeting and there's 7
Yeah.
things there, and I'm saying, well.
I think the better way of saying it, not that we're not used to that, but the better way of saying it is, we don't want to have to go in and check, is it there yet? Is it there yet? Is it there yet? Just tell us when it's found.
Yeah, no, I am right now going in and checking all the time, and I don't check my email all the time, and it doesn't ding me when it's there, so I figure 48 hours should be 48 hours. If it's not there by Friday, I shouldn't expect to find it on Monday, so.
And yeah, we go in general on our end, we've been talking about this, we understand.
Yeah, and it's, I want to reiterate, it's not just the town staff, it's us when we propose different things. It would be nice for us to be able to look at what we're asking to be posted as well as what the town staff is posting.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
everybody.
Thank
you.